It makes sense that one of the most noticeable impacts of trapping heat in the atmosphere would be extra hot weather. And that is happening. Holy buckets is it happening. Many parts of the world have been experiencing extreme heat waves this summer. In fact, the summer of 2023 has now been officially declared the hottest summer ever recorded on Earth. Wrap your head around that for a minute. And this summer is not a one-time weird event. It's part of a strong trend. Here's a map of the worldwide temperature trend since 1993, just for a real quick visual. And here are the top 10 hottest years on record before 2023. Notice how recent they all are. 2010 is the longest to go. Obviously, the world is heating up and fast. And now 2023 is the hottest ever. This has put a bit of a spotlight on extreme heat itself as a primary effect of planetary warming. There are lots of secondary, more indirect effects, but I think it makes sense to look first at the simplest impact, just plain heat. For me, the reports of extreme heat in the Northwest bring back the memory of a similar event back in July of 2021 when a heat wave hit British Columbia, just north of the US border. In that event, over 600 people died directly of heat injury. The ocean water off the British Columbia coast got so hot that billions of marine animals literally baked to death. And the normal summer shellfish industry took a disastrous hit. I've put a video of a news report from that event in the Connections page in this lesson, but another British Columbia heat wave going on right now makes me wonder what the future has in store for that area. So back to 2023. People in the southern US, Latin America, Europe, and much of Asia have been struggling with unbearable heat this summer, breaking heat records and making life extremely difficult for people to even survive. Some of the news stories coming out of the global heat wave of this year have an apocalyptic feel to them, even in this country. People being found dead after they went out for a hike, the International Boy Scouts Jamboree and many other concerts and events being canceled due to heat. Schools are letting out because it's too hot to be in the building. Prisoners are rioting due to unlivable heat of their cells and living spaces. And emergency rooms report rising incidents of patient visits due to heat injuries. Officials report fish kills and wildlife die-offs, and heat-related crop failures are increasing human hunger around the world, and the list goes on. There are serious stories about parts of the world becoming incompatible with human life. For me, this does not seem so far-fetched when I listen to stories from my daughter, who lives in South Texas and works an outdoor job. Her struggles to deal with the absolutely brutal heat they've been experiencing bring a dose of reality to my reading of those stories. Heat can also lead to drought. Warm air can hold more water vapor, so the hotter it gets, the more quickly moisture gets sucked out of the soil and into the thirsty air. So it stands to reason that when things get hot, they also get dry. Heat and drought don't always go together, but they often do. Drought is one of the most heartbreaking climate impacts because water is so important to every single living thing. Since I live in a drought-prone area, I've seen my share of suffering animals, dry creeks and reservoirs, and ruined crops. Drought is a part of the natural order of things. Droughts have always happened and have always been difficult. That hasn't changed. It's the frequency, severity, and duration of droughts that are changing. If we were having this conversation a year or two ago, we'd be talking about severe drought in a simpler way than we are today. As of this time last year, the western U.S. was suffering from mega drought, the driest period in over 1,000 years. This dryness had been so extreme that western reservoirs were drying out and rivers were running dry. The Colorado River was particularly severely impacted. This is a river that a lot of people depend on. In fact, it supplies drinking water for tens of millions of people and irrigation water for millions of acres of farmland in 7 states. 30 Native American tribes have rights to water from the Colorado, and there are 15 large dams on the Colorado River system, each of which creates a lake. Lake Mead, Lake Powell, Lake Havasu are a few of the most famous. The problem is there's less and less water to go around. The Colorado River is shrinking to the point that in 2022 there was not enough water to service all of these rights. This created a high-profile crisis. I mentioned Lake Mead, which lies behind the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. Last summer, the drought situation was dire on Lake Mead, with concerns about whether the water level would get too low to support hydroelectric operations at Hoover Dam. There were stories about all the crazy stuff that was turning up on the bottom of the lake as the shoreline retreated, like boats and cars and the bodies of murder victims. But that was last year. Then came the winter of 2022 to 23. with its record-breaking snowfalls across the western United States. I'm sure you remember the news stories with photos of homes and cars covered with 5, 10, even 15 feet of snow. And then that snow started melting in the spring. And this spring's news was full of how quickly the water levels were coming back up in some of those reservoirs along the Colorado. And now, flooding has taken the place of drought in our news feeds in a lot of parts of the country. The ups and downs of the Colorado River give a picture of the weather whiplash that we had in 2022. Drought, flooding, and record heat and record snowfall were all features of the 2022 landscape. And the picture is still muddled, 3/4 of the way into 2023, with wildfire now and hurricanes are a dramatic part of the mix. This chaotic weather situation is a great illustration of how misleading averages can be. While our changing climate will produce trends in averages, the true story is in the extremes. We can expect more of the wild fluctuations we have been seeing. Let's think a little bit about the impacts of these up and down extremes. Droughts and floods are not only opposites, they're also very closely related. One of the first casualties of drought is vegetation on the landscape. Without water, plants die. But plants are an incredibly important part of how that landscape responds to rain when it does come. After a prolonged drought, there's a lack of plant cover to protect soil surfaces from the impact of the rain and keep the soil from eroding. Under normal conditions, spring rains fall on grass, trees, and other plants and run into the soil to nourish the roots. This healthy soil holds on to this water and stays moist long after the rain. Water gently travels down into the soil to recharge the groundwater. But this is not what happens after a long drought. When an extreme storm unleashes heavy rain onto dry, bare soil without a healthy plant community on it, the water does not seep into the soil and stay there, nourishing the plants. Instead, it runs off and takes soil with it, becoming a muddy torrent downstream. And then when the rain stops, the still bare surface has lost valuable topsoil, and the soil profile is mostly dry since the water ran off instead of soaking in. This past summer, the world has suffered a lot from wildfire, including the apocalyptic horror in Hawaii, as well as everyone breathing smoke from the Canadian blazes. States of emergency due to the out-of-control wildfires were declared across Siberia as well, and also in Western Europe, including Greece, Spain, and Portugal. North Africa also experienced exceptional fires. Many lives have been lost, and ecological and property damage have been uncountable. Heat, wind, dryness, and fine fuel availability all contribute to wildfire risk. And more weather craziness is bringing these conditions together. This map shows the trend in the number of days per year that present a serious risk of wildfire. The fire situation in various parts of the U.S. is pretty serious, so much so that in California, insurance companies are declining to offer home insurance because of the elevated fire risk. I'm not sure what kind of fire season 2023 will turn out to be in this country by the time it's all said and done, but I do know that there are some clear trends showing up. Here's a graph showing the difference in the number of million acres burned in wildfires, comparing the period between 1984 and 2001 to the period between 2002 and 2020. This tells you a lot. The bottom line is that, as NOAA put it, climate change, including increased heat, extended drought, and a thirsty atmosphere, has been a key driver in increasing the risk and extent of wildfires in the western United States during the last 2 decades. Many of you will have been dealing with smoky skies recently enough to have a sense of that risk.